In this After Effects tutorial, you'll learn some of the key techniques for creating Earnedits style animations from scratch. This reel format is currently in high demand, and mastering this type of motion graphics can open doors to new clients and well-paid projects. So, if you want to learn how to create animations like these step by step, stick around until the end, because I'm going to explain everything from scratch.
But he's not spending it. Warren Buffett has $381 billion in cash. That's more money than the whole country of Greece makes. But he's not spending it.
Also, while this tutorial will cover several of the most important techniques, if you want to delve even deeper and discover how a professional project is built from start to finish, you can analyze the original project files of some of their most viral work. These files are available for purchase on their website, allowing you to study their workflow, project structure, use of effects and compositions, as well as design aspects and visual hierarchy in detail. I'll leave the link in the description if you'd like to learn more about this professional approach to working in After Effects. If you'd like to support the channel, in addition to your likes, you can also become a member of the Motion Graphics Zone on Patreon. There I share all the projects and materials I use in my tutorials, among other things, so you can continue practicing and improving your motion design skills. I've included the link in the description if you'd like to check it out. As always, the first thing we'll do is import the assets we're going to use, all except the Photoshop file, which, being separated into layers, we have to import separately. We'll save them all in the same folder. We'll import this Photoshop file as a composition. We'll create another folder so we have everything well organized. We'll go into this composition and then to the settings. By the way, if you like documentary-style editing, my course is now available. But it's not just a course in which I show you how to animate a sequence in After Effects and that's it, but I show you the entire procedure that I followed to create this animation. From the initial idea to the final render, going through each and every phase of the creative process. I'll leave the link in the description in case you want to take a look. We'll make it 1080 by 1920. Instead of applying the posterized time effect later to reduce the frame rate, we'll set it directly to 16 frames per second and a duration of 10 seconds. We'll scale it down a bit and we'll keep only this layer to better see what we're doing. With the pen tool, we'll create a mask like this. It doesn't need to be very precise with this, since one of the characteristics of the collage style is that the cutouts don't have to be perfect. We duplicate this layer, and the copy below we put it in subtract mode, and rename the one above mouth, so we have these two parts separate. We'll expand the position and select a keyframe. We'll move forward 5 frames and then move the layer down. We'll move forward another 5 frames and copy and paste the first keyframe. We'll smooth them and set the influence to 75%. To prevent the animation from ending, we'll add the expression loop out. If you want, you can adjust the mask a bit. We'll select the layer and use the Mask Feather tool. We'll make a point here and another point here. Let me mark it properly. Now we can blur this part a little so the cutout isn't so sharp, although we're going to add a background layer and it will barely be visible. We'll create a shape like this, fill it with black, and place the layer underneath. We need to parent the mouth layer to the head layer. Before animating the rotation of this layer, using the Pan Behind tool, we'll set the anchor point here so it rotates from this point. At the beginning of the timeline, we'll select a keyframe and set its rotation to -10 degrees. We'll advance 15 frames and set it to 7 degrees. 15 frames later, we'll copy and paste the first keyframe. We'll smooth them with F9 and set the influence to 75%. I might leave these at F9. To prevent the animation from ending, we'll right-click on the rotation of this layer and copy only the expression. Now we'll paste it onto the rotation of this other layer. To fill in the empty space around the neck, I'll create a shape like this. Using the eyedropper tool, I'll select a color like this, and I'll place this layer at the very bottom. It looks perfect there. This animation is now complete. Let's create another one called Silhouettes and leave everything as is. We take the character's composition and reduce its scale to 50%. Right-click and create a shape called Frame. Add a rectangle and a fill. Disable the chain to adjust the values independently, and make this shape 960 by 1345. You can also round the corners slightly and change the color. I'll use this one in case you want to use the same. Select the layer and activate the masking option. Double-click the rectangle tool. Double-click any point to select the mask, and hold down the Control key to scale it proportionally. Set the mask to subtract mode and adjust it. Move it down slightly and set the y-axis value to 1025. Now, let's continue adding elements to the composition to design the scene. Duplicate this layer, rename the copy Frame Matte, and remove the mask. We'll move it down here, and now we'll make these two layers matte alpha of this shape. Perfect. Let's continue. We're going to put this texture up here, adjust its scale, and set its rotation to 90 degrees. We need to set this texture to screen mode and also make it matte alpha of this shape. We're going to apply the levels effect. If you don't see these values, it's probably because your color depth is set to 16 or 32 bits per channel. We'll simply leave it at 8 BPC and increase the input black option to recover some of the darker areas, so the texture doesn't look so white. Okay, this looks great. We'll go to the Compositions folder and create another one called Animation, leaving everything as is. Here we'll bring in the silhouette layer, set its scale to 70%, and convert the layer to 3D. For the background, I'm going to use this layer I have here, and I'll also convert it to 3D. With a right-click, we create a 35mm camera and a node. We also created a null, converted it to 3D, and parented the camera to it. At the beginning of the timeline, we selected a keyframe and set its z-axis value to -330. We advanced to 104 and set it to 0. We smoothed the keyframes and shaped the curve as follows. Being in the last keyframe, we duplicated the null, deleted the original keyframes, and selected another. We parented the original null to the new one. And this animation will begin at frame 8. We now advance to 112 and set its z-axis value to 350. Smooth the keyframes and set the influence to 90%. We should end up with a curve like this. We positioned ourselves here at this peak, where the animation was fastest and without moving. We placed a marker to ensure the transition was clearly defined. We entered this composition and placed another marker here. And without moving from here, let's cut all these layers, including the shape layer called Frame. We duplicate this composition, and on the bottom copy, we apply the simple choker effect. This effect expands the visible parts of the layer with negative values and contracts them with positive values. We set the value to -100 and duplicate the effect. We'll also apply the fill effect. If you want to use the same color, here's the code. We duplicate the composition again, and on the bottom copy, we'll create a scale animation. We select a keyframe and move forward slightly. Here, I'll set the scale to 63%. And also change the color. Now we smooth the keyframes and give the curve this shape. We select this keyframe, duplicate the composition, and repeat the process. On the bottom copy, we increase the scale slightly and use the eyedropper tool to apply the same color. I'm going to make a few more copies until the silhouettes fill the entire composition. The process is always the same. Slightly increase the scale of each copy we make, and alternate the colors of the silhouettes to achieve this cool effect. It looks great there. Now let's select all the copies we've made. We'll hover over the first keyframe and select them all, setting the scale to 0 for all the silhouettes. We'll also cut this texture layer where we have the marker, and we'll make this part the alpha matte of the last silhouette. So we'll use Pick Whip and parent it to this composition. We need to make it visible again so the texture will also be visible in this part of the silhouettes. Okay, let's continue. To prevent the composition from being cut off there, we need to activate the continuous rasterization icon, but first we'll cut it right where we have the marker. Okay, let's activate this icon. But if you look closely, the scale of this composition has changed slightly. We'll fix that easily. We'll go into the silhouette composition, select all the silhouettes, including the texture layer, and place them on top. Now we'll convert them to 3D, and that's it. Let's preview it to check. We'll cut this grid layer here, where we have the marker, and create a solid to use as a background. What I'm going to do now is place all the elements of the composition. We need to convert them to 3D and adjust their scale and position. You can take your time here until you like the design of your scene. As always, I'll show you the exact values in case you want to do it the same way as in the tutorial. Okay, I like it there. We'll cut these 3 layers right here at the transition. Let's do another camera movement, and instead of duplicating the null one, we'll use this one. We'll go to frame 106, mark a keyframe to maintain the position, and advance to 210. We'll set a value of -235 on the z-axis. we'll smooth the keyframes, and by right-clicking on one of them, we'll set its influence to 90%. For the next move, we're going to use this null. We'll go to 205, mark a keyframe, and advance to 403. We'll set a value of 515 on the z-axis. As I always say, I use these values in this timing because, after some testing, they've worked best for me. We'll set the influence of this handle to 100% and the other one to 60%. Now we'll transition to the next scene with the fan-shaped banknotes. We convert the layer to 3D and set its scale to 60. Now, with the pan behind tool and the control key pressed, we'll place the anchor point on the left side. We set the rotation to -90 degrees on the z-axis. We make a copy, and on the bottom one, we set the rotation to -70 degrees. In total, I'm going to make 7 copies, and I'm going to set a 20-degree difference in their rotations. Okay, now we're going to create a null object that will allow us to control the rotation of the banknotes. We'll convert it to 3D, and with the pan behind tool, we'll place the anchor point right here. We'll parent all these layers to the null object, and now we're going to animate it. Here, we'll set the rotation so that no banknote is visible in the composition. We'll go to 305 and mark a keyframe, advance to 409, and set the rotation to about 15 degrees. We'll advance a little more and continue rotating until no banknote is visible in the composition. We'll select all 3, smooth them, and set their influence to 85%. To have a much cleaner and more organized timeline, we're going to cut all these layers right at the first and third keyframes, including the null object. Look, to prevent the animation from stopping when it reaches this keyframe, let's open the graphics editor and double-click on it. Activate the continuous option and adjust the in and out speeds. Now the animation won't stop, but I'll lower this value a bit, leaving it at around 5. Let's add some shadows to give the scene more depth. We'll apply the drop shadow effect and make some adjustments. Set the distance to 100, the softness to 200, and the opacity to 70. I accidentally applied the effect twice, so I'll delete this one. Press Ctrl plus C to copy it and paste it to the other layers. Well, not necessarily to this last one. Let's preview everything to see how it's coming along. This is looking great. Above this keyframe, let's add another marker. We're going to cut these two layers right here. Just like before, we'll now add elements and design the new scene. I'm going to start with this image of the Greek flag, which I'll use for the background. I'm going to convert it to 3D and adjust the rotation and scale. I'm also going to crop it here and change the color to differentiate it. Okay, let's do another camera movement. We'll go here to the last keyframe, duplicate the null, delete these, and mark a new one. We'll parent the previous null to this one, and the next animation will start at 413, so we'll put the keyframe there. We'll move forward to 611 and set a value of 695 on the z-axis. Smooth it, and give the curve this shape. We'll set the influence of this handle to 100, and we'll give this one an influence of 60%. We're going to continue adding elements. As I said before, take your time here until you like how the composition looks. I'm going to bring in this coin layer now. I'll set its scale to 10%, and I also need to convert it to 3D. To position it correctly, I'll set these values: 335 on the x-axis, 750 on the y-axis, and the Z-axis should be at 0. We'll make a copy of this layer and place it down here. If necessary, we'll adjust the position of the pen slightly, only on the X and Y axes, since we don't want a parallax effect in this area. That should do. I'm going to continue adding elements. I'll place this stamp layer down here, convert it to 3D, and adjust its scale and position. I'll set the X-axis to 740 and the Y-axis to 1,335, and I'll also rotate it slightly on the Z-axis. I'm going to change the color of all these layers and cut them right where the second marker is. For the next movement, I'll use this null point. At 6 seconds, I'm going to mark a keyframe to maintain the position, and at 8:08, I'm going to move the camera forward slightly, setting the Z-axis value to 140. I'll smooth the keyframes again and come back to the graphics editor to shape the curve. I'll set the influence of this handle to 100% and this other one to 60%. I'm going to adjust the position of the pens a bit. I like this look. Let's preview everything we've done so far. This is looking great. To transition to the next scene, we'll use the first null point. Here, we'll mark a keyframe to maintain the position. Below this keyframe, we'll set a Z value of -470. We'll move forward a bit and set a value of -770. We'll smooth the keyframes and go into the graphics editor to shape the curve. What I want is to concentrate all the force at this point to create the transition between the two scenes. We'll place another marker here and cut all these layers at this point. Now, at the last keyframe, I'm going to bring in the layers from the next scene. I'll place it below, convert it to 3D, and adjust its scale and position. I'm going to use this other layer as the background. We also need to make it 3D, and this time we're going to move it backward on the Z-axis to give it depth and show the parallax effect in this scene. We'll cut these layers where we have the marker, and now let's preview what we still need to do. If you want, you can extend all these layers by a keyframe and have these two start there. It's a small detail, but I think the eye perceives this little adjustment in the transition differently, although you can leave it as it was if you prefer. Okay, let's continue. With the text tool, I'm going to write this phrase. We'll convert the text to 3D, center the anchor point, and set these values so that it's perfectly centered in the composition. I'm also going to adjust the scale a bit. This is the font I'm using, and these are all the settings for the text layer in case you want to use the same ones. We're going to add a drop shadow effect with the softness set to 25 and increase the opacity slightly. I'll place this text layer down here with the others in the green group, since it belongs to the same scene. Now we'll add a small animation to the opacity to sync it with the audio. Obviously, the timing of this animation will depend on the audio you're using. It looks pretty good here, but if you want, you can set the softness to 0, so the words appear suddenly. In this composition, we're going to create a kind of comic speech bubble. With the rectangle tool, we'll make a shape like this and round the corners. Now, with the pen tool and the layer selected, we'll draw this point. Around here, more or less. Now, with the pan behind tool, we need to place the anchor point here. Here, everyone can write whatever they want. I'm going to write subscribe. We'll change the text color, center the anchor point, and then center it using the shape tool. We need to link the text layer to the comic speech bubble, and now we're going to add a small animation to this shape. At the beginning of the timeline, we mark a keyframe in the rotation, advance one frame, and set the rotation to 15 degrees. A little later, we set the rotation back to 0. To prevent this animation from looking so robotic, we're going to add an expression. Whenever I create this bounce effect, I always go to cinecom.net to copy this expression. We select it and copy it. Now, holding down the Alt key, we click on the rotation clock, and with Ctrl+V, we paste the expression. Wow! Now it looks fantastic. If necessary, we can adjust the position and scale of the comic speech bubble. I might increase the kerning of the text layer a bit. I like it there. We're also going to do a small animation on the scale. In frame 5, we mark a keyframe. Here, we initially set the scale to 0, smooth it, and give the curve this shape. We cut these two layers where the marker is, pass them underneath, and do a preview. We already have the camera animation and the composition of each scene. Now, to give it a much more professional look, let's add some effects and color adjustments. First, I'm going to place this grunge texture over the Greek flag. I need to adjust its scale, and I'll set the rotation to 90 degrees. The blending mode to multiply, and to prevent the texture from looking so dirty and dark, we'll apply the tint effect and invert the colors. We'll cut the layer and change its color. We also need to convert it to 3D And well, I might reduce its scale a bit more. Now let's create an adjustment layer, and here we'll add some effects. The first one is called Transform. With the Alt key pressed, click on the position clock and type this expression. This will give the camera a slight shake. Notice how the position values change, although it's a very subtle effect. Now we'll add the exposure effect. Hold down the Control key and click on the exposure clock. Here, type the following expression: posterize time, and in parentheses, put 10. On the line below, type random, open, and close parentheses, and in parentheses 0, 0.20. This means that the exposure value will vary randomly between these two values, giving us a very cool, albeit subtle, flicker effect. The next effect is called CC Lens. Set the size to 385 and leave the convergence at -80. Now we'll add a vignette to darken the edges of the composition a bit. To generate some grain, we'll add the HLS Auto Noise effect. We change the noise from uniform to grain. Set the lightness to 7% and the grain size to 0.3. We duplicate the effect and tweak the values a bit. These are the ones I used, but you can experiment with different ones. Don't be afraid to play around with the different effect parameters. This other adjustment layer will be called Blur, and will apply the Gaussian blur effect. We'll set the value to around 20, and to ensure the effect only affects the edges of the composition, we'll create a mask for this layer by double-clicking the ellipse tool. If you want, you can adjust the shape of the mask a bit. Here, we switch to Subtract and significantly increase the feathering. It looks great. Now we're going to add a general texture for the entire animation. We'll adjust its scale and rotation and set this texture to soft light mode. To lower the contrast a bit, we'll apply the levels effect. And we'll reduce the white input slider to bring back some of the white areas. It looks good now. I'm going to leave the scale of this texture at 50, and now, to recover some light in the central part, we're going to do the following. Double-click on the ellipse tool and give it this color. With the Fastbox blur effect, we're going to blur this shape. We can set the value to around 90 and adjust the shape of this ellipse a bit. And if we put this shape in Add mode, notice how the central part affected by this shape looks much brighter. This is looking great. I'm also going to add some shadows to the elements in this scene. This time I'm going to use a paid external plugin called Shadow Studio, but you can create the shadows as I showed you earlier with the banknotes. We'll copy this effect and paste it onto the rest of the elements. Notice the difference here with and without effects. Another thing you can do is activate motion blur on all layers. You don't need to do this on null layers or adjustment layers. Let's do a preview. Look, this background layer, I'm going to scale it up a bit so it covers all the edges of the composition. As for the motion blur, it looks good, but I think I'll leave it off this time. It's really a matter of personal preference. Let's do a preview to see if we're missing anything or need to correct anything. I think this first scene looks a bit flat, so I'm going to add some shadows to give it more depth. I'm going to do this with the Shadow Studio plugin, but if you don't have it, you can use the drop shadow effect. I'm going to set the master opacity to 10%, and that's it. Now I'm going to copy the effect and paste it onto the other elements. Here, I'm going to modify the angle of the shadow a little. Look how cool it looks. These shadows really do look very realistic. I'm also going to paste the effect onto these two layers. Over this scene, the one with the green layers, I'm going to add an adjustment layer with a vignette effect to darken this composition a bit more. Okay, it looks like this because the CC lens effect we have on the layer above is affecting this adjustment layer, so I'm going to increase its scale a little. And that's it. Look, this stamp layer has black edges because it's not a PNG image, so we're going to add a couple of effects. First, the one called Extract. And we're going to move this point to the right, roughly there. Now, to refine the edges, we'll use the simple choker effect we used before. We'll set this value to positive to contract the visible parts of the layer, and this way we get perfectly clean edges. And now we're done. The animation is finished and working perfectly, with a super professional result. And if you get stuck at any step or there's something you don't understand, leave a comment and we'll sort it out. And if you like the tutorial, give it a thumbs up so I know. See you in the next video.